Thank you, Barbara, for that kind introduction. And hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying a beautiful conference and that you're enjoying a lovely summer. It's my honor to be here with you all. And I'm so excited to share with you what we're learning about the science of healing connection. We often explore this in Western scientific terms in an area that we call the Biofield, which we'll be unpacking today, and is the subject of my recently published book called Healing Ourselves: Biofield Science and the Future of Health. I'm so pleased to share that this book has just won a Nautilus Award, which is such a great honor. So let's move into why we're really all here. And I think it's no surprise to any of us that we know part of our evolution as human beings is simply to see past the mysteries and silos of separatism. It's a mystery because it's not really true. The mystery is why we continue to adhere to models of living that really are based in an idea of separatism, that you and I are fundamentally different from each other, that we can't really connect on a deep level, that my consciousness might matter for me, but not necessarily you. And what the science is showing us is that that is all completely false. In fact, we do have the power to create our own reality, and we are co-creating it at every moment. And that's why we come together in communities like this to remind ourselves of that. And what's beautiful is I believe the science is evolving to remind us of this too, our greatest power, which is, of course, our collective healing force. And perhaps health has been on everyone's minds as of late. And it's important for us to remember that while, of course, our health is our wealth, the absence of health is often when we start feeling the poverty, right? So when we're feeling okay, we don't really think about this. But with the global pandemic, the mental health crisis, the chronic disease crisis, the opioid crisis, the chronic pain crisis, we're all quite aware of this statement, right? And so then the question is, what are we doing about this in science and in medicine to address these global health crises? And how does our consciousness actually lead the way for systems change in health and healing? Here's the good news. We continue to evolve our scientific understandings every day. So whereas 60 years ago, we literally thought that the immune system did not connect with the brain, we know now that to be false. In fact, the understanding and the discovery that the immune system is not only connected to the brain, but the endocrine system, to our emotions, that our emotions deeply affect our health, that our societal culture connects our health, sociodemographics connects with our health, can impact the movement of physiology down to gene expression. This has been relatively new in science. It's really stuff that we've only uncovered in the last 50 or so years. It's actually what gave rise to my field of study called psychoneuroimmunology, which is just a fancy term for exploring how the mind and body work. But here's the marvel of it all. Because now we know to look, we have found that there's actually immune system in the brain. There are lymphatic microvessels in the brain. And we just discovered this recently, a few years ago, honestly. This is coming from a study published in Nature, one of the most widely read journals and respected journals in the world. And because we started looking for these interconnections in science, we started discovering them. So it's beautiful. So we're evolving in modern science and medicine, we can say modern day science and medicine, to understand that the body is not just a well-oiled machine with different parts that don't talk to each other, or that our emotions don't talk to our body. We're past that to a great degree. So that's great. And we're moving back into the ancient understandings of the body as a garden. And this is a depiction actually from Chinese medicine, who is always, those traditions, Chinese medicine, native medicine, Ayurveda, all indigenous forms of healing and medicine from across the world for millennia have understood this, that the body, mind, spirit is a garden, that healing is the restoration of harmony. And it is not just about getting rid of a disease. So how do we move forward, and what are we learning in science about this? Well, when we go back to those ancient understandings, we understand that consciousness-based healing, that is, understanding that our consciousness is not just a epiphenomena of the brain, which some scientists believe in, and that's fine. There's room for all perspectives in science, of course. But when we look at these ancient perspectives, we understand that they viewed consciousness and understood consciousness as being fundamental to the healing process, because consciousness is the fundamental ground of all existence. And it is from consciousness that we develop things like the energy body, the mental body, the physical body, all of the koshas, for example, that are talked about in Vedic traditions and in other traditions. The reason why this is important is because these systems of healing always came from a cosmology of connection. If consciousness is the source and substance of all creation, then that means on a fundamental level, we are all deeply connected, because at our core, we are simply expressions of consciousness in form. So how does this relate to healing? Well, when we understand healing in this way, we understand that if consciousness is the core of it, then there are many different ways that consciousness is expressed in the physical world. For example, in herbs, in our environment, in the trees, in the grass, in the earth, the food we eat, the movement that we have in our bodies, the environment around us, all play a vital role in our healing response. So these have always been based in what we might now call, in Western scientific terms, salutogenesis, the process of healing, the restoration of harmony, as opposed to pathogenesis, which is simply the study of disease itself and getting rid of a disease. That has its place, but if we look at everything just from the point of view of getting rid of a disease, we miss out on that recognition and understanding that actually it is bringing ourselves back to the experience of larger consciousness that really drives the strong healing response. So this is the philosophy, right, behind all of these traditions. And of course, what's so beautiful is there's so many. And in my book, I really review much more about this in terms of our mind, body, spirit practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, many different forms of contemplative practices and meditation, yoga. There are so many practices, and the research in a nutshell, in our time today, I share much more deeply in the book, but the research is very clear that whether we engage in one or more of these practices, they will all lead us back to that restoration of health and harmony. In fact, some of the outcomes are very similar, whether we're practicing mindfulness, yoga, other contemplative practices. Why? Because they're all fundamentally leading us back to ourselves, to our spirit. And when we explore this more deeply, one area that really hasn't been touched upon in modern science, say modern Western science, is this area of what we often call energy or subtle energy, what we Western scientists are calling part of what we describe as the biofield. And here you see a depiction of the nadis in the body. This comes from the Upanishads. Of course, this particular graph was shared in one of our peer-reviewed published papers. You can see the reference there. But this is really referring back to thousands of years of experience and depiction of the nadis, which are subtle energy channels in the body that relate our consciousness with our health and healing. So this area of the biofield is still considered quite a cutting edge for modern science and medicine. And quite frankly, many mainstream scientists just don't believe in it. But the question is, what is the evidence behind it? And how do we even look at that as scientists? So one of the ways that we have been looking at it, I have personally been looking at it in my own studies over the years, and many others within our nonprofit, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, is to study biofield healing, or what we might call subtle energy healing. And the reason we like to look at these practices, there are many reasons, of course, but from a scientific point of view, it's fascinating because here, as you see, sometimes these healing approaches are practiced not just with touching. Sometimes we're touching the person, sometimes we're not. Sometimes we may be in the same room. Sometimes we can actually work at a distance. Many healing practitioners do. So as a scientist, It helps us understand that we have to move beyond those models of reductionism, that, everything is just based on the physical body, physical proximity, touch, mental cognition, stretching, needles, all of these things that we could explain by so-called reductionist models, only physicality, because there's something else going on here, right? That's the premise, that there is a connection that's flowing. There's a conscious connection that is helping foster a healing response. How in the world could that work? Well, I'll share with you some of our motivation too. Why do we even look at this? It's because of people like Mira. And Mira is, her story is detailed in my book, and I'll just give you the thumbnail of what happened to Mira. When she was 2.5 years old, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. No family history. Complete shock to her parents. And they did what any parents would probably do in that situation. They sought the best of care. And the best of care said at that time, we need to get this tumor out of her brain. We want to operate and give her radiation. So they went straight away for that. They got the tumor out. She went for radiation. Because they got the tumor out, she was able to completely recover, except that the radiation, unfortunately, because of where it had to be, caused some developmental delays for Mira, which are permanent. But yet her life was saved, right? Which was wonderful. And unfortunately, a few months later, the tumor came back, but in an area this time around her brainstem where the doctor said, we can't operate here. If we operate here, she may die. And we could try for radiation, but it's possible that if we move to radiation, she may experience even more developmental delays. Significant ones. And so we're sorry, we really don't know what else to do. So as you can imagine, her parents were devastated. Long story short, they were introduced to a healer in Tel Aviv. Now I will share that this healer in Tel Aviv is no longer with us in physical form, because many people ask about her after they hear this story. So I do want to let you know that. The long and the short of it is, this healer, who has a miraculous story of her own, being a survivor, baby survivor of the Holocaust, where she believes she received this gift of healing, was able to work with Mira at a distance, Mira being in California, the healer being in Tel Aviv. And within months of working with this healing practitioner, who explained to Mira's parents that the healing is up to Mira, that she was going to help facilitate the causes and conditions to allow Mira to deeply connect with her higher self, her inner self, her soul, her spirit, so many words that we use for this. And that it was through this enhanced connection that the healing would occur, and that it was going to be up to Mira, her higher self, to decide whether the tumor would stay or the tumor would go. Because again, healing is not just getting rid of a disease. It is about the restoration of harmony and a deep connection with our spirit, so that our spirit guides the process. So this is how the healer explained it to Mira's parents. And they said, well, we will do whatever we can to support. They were, of course, very spiritual people. Well, here's the good news. Mira is alive and thriving today. She's actually just turned 21. And after just a few short months of working with this healing practitioner, she is thriving. She is helping others with disabilities, and she is a beautiful example of how to lead one's life fully, whatever the setbacks may be. So how does this happen? Okay, this is one of the questions that we have as scientists, because we are not content to just say this is a miracle. Miracles are simply something that we have not tried to well explain in science. So one of the ways that we are exploring this is through what we call the biofield. And these are interacting and interpenetrating fields of energy and information that guide our health. In science speak, we may say that regulate the homeodynamic functioning of a living organism, which is just a way of saying that these fields of energy and information are dynamic. They're always affecting us, whether we talk about it affecting our cells, our person, between us, or the earth. Biofields exist everywhere, and they're all at those multiple levels of scale. And this isn't really that foreign. So if you're talking to people that say, what is the biofield? You can tell them, well, biofields include things like measuring our heart rate and measuring our brain waves. This is part of the biofield. And in this case, we can measure that. We can explore the electromagnetic readouts of our organ systems, and they tell us something about our health. Not controversial at all, right? This isn't really controversial, but it's extremely wonderful and innovative. we can actually manipulate the voltage gradients across cell membranes to grow new neural tissue. That's part of biofield science. This is the work of Dr. Mike Levin at Tufts University, doing incredible work here, exploring the biofield of cells and how it relates to regenerative medicine. But these subtle aspects of the biofield have been discussed and utilized by healing practitioners in every tradition, in every culture for millennia. And so here we are talking about those aspects described as chi, prana, ki, so many different terms. And there are ancient practices like laying on of hands, external qigong. And then there are more modern practices like healing touch and Reiki. And of course, you can see here in this beautiful depiction by Alex Gray how this is working, what is happening. And here are the fundamental keys that all healing practitioners talk about, whatever tradition. They may have their protocols, they may have different ways of seeing the field, feeling the field, but they will all fundamentally say the first thing that I do is to come into a larger understanding of self, not even just understanding, but experience. They may use practices like grounding, centering. We can consider them like contemplative practices to connect with the larger whole, which they might call universal life energy, again, soul, spirit, God, earth, ancestors, and ask for permission to facilitate healing in another, and allow for the channeling of the currents of compassion to foster this healing response. So these are some of the fundamental things that are going on in this process, right? And here's a modern example of how this is being used in clinics and hospitals. So what do we know about these practices? Well, first, we know that there is strong evidence. This is based on systematic reviews where we compile the data across these studies, and we find that there's strong evidence for decreased pain and moderate evidence in hospitalized patients, in dementia, and importantly, through our systematic reviews and meta-analyses, we have determined that it's not just touch that are driving these effects. We see these effects even when folks are not touching, right? Negating this idea that it's all about simply touch. A lot of people ask, though, especially in the scientific world, well, but what is the difference between that and placebo? And if the person believes they're getting healing, well, then isn't that enough? And isn't that really what it is? I mean, how do we know it has anything to do with energy per se, right? It's a great question. And some of us have done these studies to try to help address that question because placebo in itself is so fascinating. I have a whole chapter in my book devoted to placebo. I call it Heal. Placebo are holistic elements that activate life force. And I share more about it in the book. I won't derail our conversation here and just share that if you're interested in that, I have some resources to share that more videos too. But here's a study I did to help address that question where I ran a randomized placebo-controlled trial. This was done at UC San Diego, the first and sadly only randomized control trial in healing that has been conducted there. But we were so pleased to conduct this in collaboration with the Moores Cancer Center, General Clinical Research Center, and others. And in a nutshell, what we did was we wanted to address cancer-related fatigue, because many of you who have been touched by cancer probably know that cancer-related fatigue is the number one complaint among cancer patients and survivors. And we have no standard way of treating this, and patients are suffering. So from a holistic point of view, from a consciousness-based healing point of view, if you were to ask these holistic healers, what is going on here? They would say, well, it's pretty simple. Actually, these folks are wiped out. Their vital energy is depleted because they've just gone through the cancer diagnosis process, the stress of that, the treatments like chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, which most of these patients are having, the whole gamut, and the recovery. So when I asked our healing practitioners, what can we do for these patients? They said, let's do a process that we call energy chelation. It's a hands-on process to stimulate vital energy in the body and draw out any remaining toxicities from the cancer and its treatment. So these are survivors who have gone through the cancer journey, diagnosed as cancer-free, but still completely wiped out. They can't engage in their regular activities, even exercise, yoga, whatever they've been doing for their health. They don't have the energy, right? These are the people that we're working with. So we randomized them to 3 groups: energy healing, what we call mock healing, where people received simple touch, without the energy healing component, and I'll share more about how we did that, or just treatment as usual. They came in twice a week for 4 weeks. So they got 8 sessions in total over a month. And we looked at things like fatigue and quality of life and the rhythm of cortisol in the day. And besides just having people randomized to, say, a placebo trial, we also really wanted to know about these placebo factors because they're so powerful. So things like belief. How much did they believe that their treatment was helping them, regardless of whether they thought they were getting healing or just simple touch? How connected did they feel with their practitioner? Because we know that connection plays such a huge role in our healing process. It could be connection itself, just the feeling of being cared for, being touched, could have profound effects, right? So these are some of the ways we tried to tease apart some of these placebo elements from the energy healing part also. And here's what we found. Here you look at the white bar. If you look at the white bar, those are the people that receive the actual energy healing from trained energy healers. And you can see here a marked decrease in the fatigue. This is using a gold standard called the multidimensional fatigue symptom inventory. And what we see is that these women drop down to levels of fatigue of what you would expect for the person walking down the street. So their fatigue basically completely remitted to being normalized in just 4 weeks. And when we look at the light gray bar, which are people that received, quote, mock healing, let me break down what that was for a minute. For the mock healing, we solicited women, because all of the practitioners here were women, all of the participants were women, and we solicited women who were scientists, what we would call skeptical scientists. That is, that they were open. That's what a true skeptic is, right? Just open. They're not well-versed in either thing. They don't have any attachment to either way, whether healing exists or not. They kind of don't really believe healing exists, but they're open to the possibility, but they're not trained. And in this case, these women were not practicing meditation, energy healing, even yoga, although they did exercise. So they were healthy young women. And we trained them in the hand positions, and we trained them to greet the patients, but all the sessions were conducted in silence to try to minimize the variability because we know talking has a huge effect in social support. So that's what the women who were receiving mock healing were doing. They were being touched by a happy, kind of loving person, 2 times a week for 4 weeks. Similar. So to an outside observer, it looks the same, right? The patient's laying on the table, they're being touched. But in one case, a person is skilled in energy healing, actually sensing and moving energy in the body, which is, of course, invisible to the naked eye. To an outside observer, it looks the same. So those are the main differences. And you can see here that the mock healing group also decreases in fatigue. Not as much as the healing group, but enough to where they reduce to levels of what you would expect for a cancer patient who is just about to go through chemotherapy. So statistically significant, and I would say clinically too, just not as large as an effect. And of course, we saw differences between the Biofield actual energy healing group and the mock healing group in different aspects of fatigue. So there were some significant differences there. But what really was flooring were the effects on cortisol rhythms. And cortisol, as we know, a stress hormone in the body, like many things in the body, follows a natural rhythm, tends to, for normal, healthy people, peak at about 30 minutes after we wake up, and then kind of decline through the day. And so that's a nice rhythm for us to have because, among other things, cortisol regulates inflammation. Many inflammatory markers have a rhythm throughout the body. So this rhythm is important. It also impacts sleep and many other things. We want to have a nice rhythm of cortisol in the body. As it turns out, fatigued breast cancer survivors have dysregulations in this rhythm. They can be flat. They can be dysregulated. Different things can happen. And the dysregulation in cortisol has actually been linked to fatigue, depression, and even mortality in breast cancer patients. So we really wanted to look at this. Would cortisol rhythms normalize if they received healing? And what we found was quite shocking to me, I will say, as a scientist. Only the women that received the actual healing showed a movement in their cortisol. That is, they showed a normalization in the cortisol rhythm, a more regular slope of change through the day over the course of the intervention of this month. And as I spoke about, that is really important. Now, we looked at the placebo group, no change. We then put in every single placebo variable like belief, connection, even clinical variables like body mass index, chemotherapy status to see if any of those things could explain these results, and they didn't. It was just the energy healing. So here with this is robust kind of placebo-controlled trial, we accounted for placebo factors, and we're seeing effects on physiology. How is this happening? Well, we're not the only study, right? There are other studies out there, and a lot of people say, well, humans are messy. We know you control for placebo, but can you really control for that? How is this happening on the physiological level? What's the mechanism? Now, I will share, I'm not into the idea of mechanism at all. It implies a singularity that I think makes no sense. The body is pleiotropic, that is, there are multiple pathways, there are multiple mechanisms, there's spiritual mechanisms, emotional mechanisms, even within the physical, there are many mechanisms. That would be my view, and I talk about all of this in more detail in my book, talk about quantum physics as an explanation and entanglement in other areas. But people want to know, is this real? Does this have an effect all the way on the physiology? What are we seeing in cell and animal studies? Well, here are a couple of them, and I detail all of these in my book too. This is a study done by Anne Baldwin at the University of Arizona, where she looked at mice that were being stressed by noise. This is a very well understood thing that happens, and people study this actually in terms of just looking at stress on the body. So these poor mice are in these cages and they're exposed to very loud noise, and we know that when that happens, they have inflammation that is created in the body through what is called stress-induced microvascular leakage. Literally, certain cells in their body will start leaking because of the stress of the noise. It impacts the central nervous system and therefore the immune system. What Anne found was that for the mice that received actual Reiki, and here they're not actually being handled, Reiki is being emitted, at a distance in front of them, so they're in the same room, but they're not being touched. What she found is when she compared that again with sham Reiki, people who aren't trained, who just kind of stand there with their hands like this, that it's only the mice or the rats rather, that are receiving Reiki that show a reduction in the stress-induced microvascular leakage. That is, it helped to mitigate those effects of the noise on their immunity. There are many other studies too. For example, Dr. Gloria Gronowicz, now a retired professor from the University of Connecticut, has done a series of wonderful studies looking at cells and also animals. And of course, what she's found is that therapeutic touch, as compared to mock therapeutic touch, actually has effects on growing normal cells in cell cultures and reducing the spread of cancer cells. So the energy, if you can say, seems to have an intelligence. It's not simply energy then, it's energy and information. This is one of the reasons we discuss things as the biofield as opposed to just energy medicine. Some of our scientists don't like the term energy medicine because they think it implies that this is all energy, and the physical definitions of energy is that it drops off at a distance, right? So they're saying this is energy and information. And there's much more to explore. The energy has an intelligence. This is what these studies are telling us. Cancer cells are reducing, regular cells are proliferating. Gloria's also done these studies with mice where she's looked at the effects of therapeutic touch compared to mock therapeutic touch on tumor growth and tumor movement. Okay, that is the spread of tumor or metastasis in the body. And she has found, compared to mock therapeutic, and this is all peer-reviewed published research, that therapeutic touch will reduce or can reduce the spread of cancer in the body of these mice. And she's found this down to inflammatory cytokine levels. And here we're finding a pattern in the data where now our colleagues at MD Anderson Cancer Center, using a different mouse model of cancer, but again, a mouse model of cancer, but in this case, lung cancer as opposed to breast cancer, which is what Gloria was looking at, similar patterns where they are seeing, first in the first study, an actual reduction in tumor size. In the second study, they didn't see that, but they saw the reduction of tumor spread, the reduction of metastasis, all the way down to changes in expression of cell subsets, inflammatory cytokines, and even cell signaling. And I won't bore you. I talk about this in more detail in the book, talk about the specific cell signaling pathways and the corroborations with studies at Harvard. So we're starting to see this pattern in the data is the point, right? And the pattern in the data is showing us, when we look on the clinical level, that connecting consciously with another being and having some training in how to work with energy can help us to reduce another person's pain, fatigue, anxiety, and other points of suffering. And we're seeing this down to the physical level. We're even seeing this in cell and animal studies. So the ability of our consciousness itself, in ways that we're just beginning to understand, has a powerful role, not only in augmenting our healing, but the healing of others. And this is profound and so important for our times, because it empowers us to recognize that we truly have so much capability to heal each other as well as ourselves. So how do we do that? The third part of my book is called The Healing Keys. So the first parts are philosophy, science, ancient, and modern. The third part is the how-to. What can we learn from the experiences in meditation, the knowledge and wisdom of ancient practices, the healing practices, and even clinical psychology? How can we move through the day cultivating what I call the healing keys for ourselves, and so that we can better be a force of healing for others? But here they are, and they're very simple. Grounding for vitality, that is coming straight into our bodies, connecting with the earth, and fostering the bioenergetic connection with our bodies and the earth for powerful energy flow. That allows us to spin off things we don't need and also reconnect us with the larger whole. Flowing with emotions, so important. Emotional health is key for our times. And as a human species, we're still just waking up to the power of emotions and skillfully navigating our emotions. We don't have to run away from them. We don't have to repress them. We can welcome all of our emotions in. We can feel our emotional energy, and we can work with it for powerful healing. And one of the ways that we can do that is actually to connect with our creative process. So I teach all of this in more detail in the book. We can set our healing intention. This is more than just the mental. This is uniting the mental and the vital. Some of you may have heard of the term sankalp or sankalpa, a yogic term. This is really what intention is about on the deepest level here. So really connecting in with our hearts as well as our minds. And it's a beautiful process. So there's much more to say about that, and I share more in deeper settings in the book and teachings. Connecting to heal is a vital healing key, and what we've learned from the research is that it's not about how many people we connect with, it's about the quality of our connection. It's about the connection with our deeper self, with our higher guidance, and with our capacity to love ourselves as well as others. There's so much richness here for our healing growth. And perhaps the most important key, which is surrender. So connected with our state of consciousness, our ability to be one with the all, and our ability to let go of our conditioned minds, let go of our expectations even, let go of all of that, to come into understanding that we're part of that larger whole. And when we do that, we connect with our healing desires, we feel our emotions, we set our intentions, we connect with support, and then we let go. And in that letting go, we allow for possibilities to emerge that we didn't even know we could have, right? Here it is from a chakra-based point of view. I draw great inspiration from my healing teacher, Reverend Rosalind Bruyere, who taught me much about healing and energy. So we can cultivate these healing keys in our bodies, in our biofields, with our energy, by allowing our awareness to come into our energy body and our chakras to help guide us through the healing keys. And so here's sort of a mind map, if you will, of those. And it's important for us to remember that the chakras do not work in isolation, that indeed they're always co-creating together. And yet these hubs allow us to foster these connections with our energy centers and the world around us. So we don't have full time to go into all of these, but I do go into some of them in the book. And this is grounding, of course. Some of you may be aware of the role of Muladhara chakra in this. Flow with the Svadhisthana chakra is particularly powerful for creativity and feeling our emotions. Setting powerful intentions involves, to a great degree, of course, the solar plexus and also the heart. And the heart, of course, such a powerful, powerful hub for connection in the spiritual realms as well as the physical realms. And the process of surrender. So important for our times. So important for us to move out of the dualistic thinking, the soul dualistic thinking that has been plaguing our planet because we are contracting our consciousness, right? By only engaging in dualistic thinking, the either or, the right or wrong, the only this way. Surrender helps us release all of that, open to the wider understanding of the tapestries of truth that are woven by each of our threads of understanding. So these are the keys. I do want to share a little bit about how we're bringing this out into the world, because of course we need to nurture ourselves with these healing keys, be fortified by the evidence, and because we're not separate from each other. This is the time for us to break those silos of separation, come into connection, so that all of us can flourish, because we are all part of the one. And this is important for those of us who are in a position of privilege, position of power, to be able to do this. So at our nonprofit, we bring together not only scientists of various disciplines, but also our healing practitioners, our educators, our community leaders, artists, to lead humanity to heal ourselves by sharing collectively our wisdom. We do this, for example, with the community with free webinars. Every month, we have Free Friday webinars, the first Friday of every month, usually with key leaders in healing. These are scientists and also healing practitioners and educators who teach us about healing and what is present for them and skills that we can use. We also share a lot of the evidence. I've shared some of this with you today. We have lots of resources. If you want to be, say, a conscious activist in this area, one of the things that you can do is go to this page, reportonhealing.com, which will fortify you with an 82-page report and a quicker 10-page summary on the field of biofield science and healing. What do we know? Is this real? How much data is it? What is it telling us? What is the state of the evidence on things like biofield devices? There's so much here. You can explore it and also explore our roadmap and action plan for systems change. Take a look at that roadmap and action plan for systems change and see how you'd like to get involved, and then contact us. As I mentioned, the other way that you can get involved is to come into community, come to our events, come to our online events, and connect with us in our newsletter. We share some of the most cutting-edge scientific information from many of our colleagues. We also share some of the most wonderful events that are happening, many of them which are free. Because truly we are one. So when we come together in this way, it's just beautiful what can emerge. And I'm just sharing with you here this beautiful picture that was taken by our colleague, Jan van de Grief, who is in the Netherlands, the retired professor from the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, a systems scientist. He does a lot of work in metabolomics, and he is an award-winning photographer. So just look at this picture that he took of a flock of birds. Look at how they've come together to form this larger whole. I mean, it's just so beautiful. And this is nature. This is who we are. And we may think we're just one little bird there, but in fact, we're part of this larger whole. We may not see the beautiful dynamic pattern that we are co-creating together. We may think it's unconscious, but we can actually come into consciousness around it, right? And one of the ways we do that is by coming together in conscious community like we are right here, right now. And I'm so grateful that we have come together in this way. So I invite you to stay in touch with us. Here are some ways you can be in touch with me. I am on the social media areas and platforms and all that sort of thing. Invite you to come and check out the book and connect in with us at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And I want to thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you.